where my teachers, in a pre-9/11 world, my teachers constantly said negative things about Muslims. And I remember so many times my teachers talking about how barbaric and primitive Muslims were. And so this is all before 9/11, and that, you know, that's definitely a part of my awareness and understanding of this world, and so many other kids that were growing up at that time throughout this country. So Islamophobia within the school systems and for young children is not a new phenomenon that they've been navigating, but it has been heightened. It is at a different level now because there's a separate justice system ultimately for Muslims. So we have the schools, and the organization that did research on Islamophobia that Muslim youth in America are experiencing is called Sound Vision, and they said that there was a 600% increase of Muslim youth on the suicide prevention hotlines of the United States.
What was that figure?
600% upshoot of Muslim youth calling the suicide hotlines national suicide hotlines. So that's coming from national figures. So this is heavily impacting the psyches of Muslim youth that are in the United States. But then compounding issues are that these communities are being surveilled. And that's also adding to an atmosphere of fear that they're experiencing, their parents are experiencing. There's there are layers of fear, and it seems like you can't go anywhere. So it's your school, but if you're going to your mosque, you know, obviously, I mean, we just joke about it. We're like, oh yeah, every other person's an FBI agent, or you know, just a joke. Oh yeah, that uncle is a CIA agent, you know, or that guy is definitely a CIA agent. It's so normal, and it's so deranged to think about. This is a normal thing to say or think. That it's so a part of the fabric to be paranoid. I feel like we're living in the Soviet Union, Muslims, in like the 80s or something. But, so you have the mosque being surveilled, obviously, right? But then you have entrapment being a very real phenomenon. I mean, if you look at all of the figures of the so-called US terrorists within the United States, overwhelmingly have been entrapped by the FBI, overwhelmingly. And so when you had entrapment taking place, for example, there was a mentally ill African-American man that was entrapped by the FBI, or that was Muslim, around New Year's Eve in New York City. Just have to wait a few days later for all of the information to come out, ultimately. And we look at the Center of Constitutional Rights and the records for examining these issues of entrapment, preying on the most vulnerable, and especially young men from the ages of 13 to 18 have been the most entrapped youth in this country. And then, so you have their schools, then you have their communities that are being surveilled, their MSAs when they get to college, their mosques, but then you have a separate prison system. The separate justice system, there is not the same, we do not have the same civil liberties. These young men that were born and raised in this country, so many young men I can think of from the Chicagoland area, that you know, I'm familiar with personally, they're now not getting the same justice system or adequate civil liberties and due process. Their stories are not even in the paper, and they don't even have the evidence, all of the evidence to indict these young men without bringing in the entrapment. So all of these issues create a completely different reality. And Islamophobia in the United States, when we talk about what some of these Republican candidates are saying today, whether it's Ted Cruz of what he said yesterday or patrolling Muslim neighborhoods or whatever, I was just thinking, what's new? Oh, really? You just want to, as if that isn't a new, as if that's a new phenomenon. Trump saying he wants to ban Muslims, as if that didn't start happening already after 9/11. I mean, the Muslims that are here have already been here. I mean, I remember mass deportations happening right after 9/11, people being rounded up and just like massively deported. So immigration levels of Muslims, they're not coming here. That ban is already a part of all of the immigration policies. I mean, maybe people they're not aware of it. So Trump saying that is really like, oh, it's not any new information. That already happened. That's all. Did you want to say something? Yeah.
I mean, I think you covered a lot of this. My name is Sakina Rizvi. I work with Imam Medics International, and so we're a faith-based Muslim organization.
He was the one who led the ethnic cleansing of Muslims in the state that he was the governor in the state of Gujarat. And he is now the prime minister of the nation. And his party has a lot of influence on what's happening within India. And so there is an atmosphere in India where Islamophobia is actively cultivated and it is supported. However, this is not the beginning of Islamophobia in India. Islamophobia in India, you can look back to the 1992, the destruction of Babri Masjid, and you can look at the former government, the Congress that was in office, basically turned a blind eye to it and saw that this was an issue that was politically galvanizing people and inciting people in unusual ways. But something that's also very interesting was that India was relatively socialist in fabric until its markets opened up to the world around the mid-90s. And as the markets opened up, the international markets, you also have a rise of communal violence that took place, and it began to rise then. And it became a way of greater political organization to incite hatred with the current administration. Most recently, we had 2 ministers of parliament in India that said that Muslims should be eradicated from the face of this earth. And nothing was said by the prime minister to distance himself from those comments or to admonish the MPs of his party that made those statements. One of the issues that we're running into now is that this ideology called Hindutva, which is a Hindu nationalist ideology, is also posing obstacles for us in organizing in the United States and abroad. Most recently, we had 4 protests that took place in Chicago, Washington, D.C., New York, and Boston after a series of killings that targeted Muslims under the accusation of eating beef. So now beef has been banned in many parts of India. A source of food that was available to, like I said, socioeconomically most disadvantaged groups of people, Muslims and Dalits, Muslims and the untouchable caste. And these people were murdered under the suspicion of eating beef, and we had these protests, and at several protests we ran into difficulty because we had a group of people that were recording our protest and threatened to have the visas of the people at the protest be removed. So we had coalitions in many places of Indian Americans of all backgrounds that believed in international human rights and dignity. So varying religious beliefs, but we all believe in human dignity and international human rights. And a group called the Hindu America Foundation, a foundation in Washington, D.C. that is pro-BJP, the current government. They have been posing challenges for us in terms of organizing. Most recently, we're also facing challenges from our history being destroyed not only within Indian school textbooks, so Indian school textbooks are being rewritten to remove Mughals, the Mughals of India, from textbooks, as well as Urdu, the language that a majority of Muslims in India speak. The language is now being eradicated from public documents. It's making it very difficult for people to file their reports against the police or to seek assistance within hospitals. But that fight is not only happening within India. Within the United States, organizations such as the Hindu America Foundation, the Hindu Education Foundation, and the Oberoi Foundation have been targeting different state textbooks. And right now, our battle is with the California School Board, and the California School Board has been lobbied by the Hindu America Foundation, Hindu Education Foundation, and the Oberoi Foundation, all BJP, all pro-BJP Indian American organizations, and they have rewritten the history of not only Muslims within India, Christians in India, of Sikhs within India, and Dalits within India, which are majority of the people that they are the most marginalized communities within India. So our collaborators, our Dalit collaborators in the United States, have been working with us to get our voices heard, to make sure that the issues are not obliterated from textbooks. The Hindu America Foundation does not want to include caste within the California school textbooks, but the Dalit community, which is Indian American, is saying that the reality of that suffering still exists. So you can't water down the reality of that situation. So we are facing these types of challenges in terms of history books within the United States, also being on the front lines of understanding these issues. The Virginia textbooks have already been changed. So these are some of the things that we're working through now.
As a Muslim American who's learning and trying to promote civil liberties for Muslim Americans in the U.S., you cannot be blind to the African American experience, for example. We're still struggling, and it's sort of overlapping because don't forget we also have many African American Muslims as well. So the circles overlap. So you build coalitions by making it what it is, and that is it's a human problem. It's a human suffering. And when one person is denied their civil rights or their civil liberties, it's either a matter of time before you are denied or your people have already been denied it, because American history, is rampant with different people having gone through similar experiences of being denied civil liberties and being scapegoated. It's also a part of learning history, like interfaith work. Some of the things that are happening to Muslims is very reminiscent to the things that escalated into what happened with the Holocaust for our Jewish brothers and sisters, right? And so you had this dehumanization of people of the Jewish faith, and we had it, and if you look at the symptoms, if you look at the ways in which they were dehumanized, we're seeing the same pattern now being exhibited with Muslim Americans. And so you have to learn from those histories, and you reach out to people who have the ability to empathize because they themselves have gone through the experience. As far as building coalitions within our own communities, it's most of what we have to do at CARE, at least what we've experienced, is education, especially again when you have a large immigrant population. Many people don't know how to access local governments. Many people don't know how to access services. And a big part of what we have to do is to let them know that there is redress, there is recourse if you know what channels to take. And a big part of what we do is to really educate our own community so we can build solidarities within that community, and then extending our hand outward to interfaith communities who see this as a human problem, not as a Muslim American problem. Question their identity. question their names, question their ethnicities, question their brownness, if they look Muslim, if they're identifiably Muslim. And I've heard many stories, and one of the things that I had touched upon is that in schools we see that Islamophobia. I mean, schools are really a micro. Yeah, it's really just a microcosm of what's happening in society. So what's happening in the home and what's happening in larger society and what they see in TV is going to be amplified in schools with little children. Really. So what we've seen is that bullying of Muslim students is up, and one of the sister chapters of CARE recently came up with a report in which they did a survey in California public schools and found that Muslim children are being bullied twice as much as the national average, about 50%. That's 1 in every 2 kids. And the asterisk with that, and it's an important one, is that they're not just being bullied for the usual general reasons that all people are being bullied, but this survey specifically looked at being bullied because of your religious identity. And so we see double the national average, and we see the sole cause of that jump is religious identity of Muslims. And what else we see with that is that it's not just peer bullying, but Islamophobia is reaching children in the form of those that are supposed to protect them are actually sometimes the aggressors themselves, or not protecting them. So in that sense, they are being victimized 2 ways. And then just to add a third layer of that, there are various policies which add a third layer of victimization with children when it comes to Islamophobia, because we have to realize that what we're talking about, again, is when we say being ostracized for your religion, it often has to do with taunting about being, let's say, for example, a terrorist or having a bomb or something like that. And what that ends up doing is it becomes a security issue with the school, who then has to report it to higher authorities, and then the children are then victimized again on a state level, on a local level, or on a city level, when other authorities like the police department then come in and pull out the child and question the child, and then you have these issues, and then how is that child supposed to return back to the classroom, right? So you see that it's systematic and it's complex. And then let's not forget that we have a whole generation of post 9/11 children who have been growing under this dark cloud of suspicion that has been following them the entire time. And so it's almost impossible for them not to think, is there something inherently wrong with being Muslim? Because that is what they see, and that is what they are bombarded with all the time. As a parent myself of 4 children, I've taught my children to always question and challenge things and to look for answers outside of what general propaganda tries to teach them. But I'm a little bit more savvy in the sense that I grew up in the public school system here. I'm not a first-generation immigrant, and so I've seen and heard enough for me to be able to direct my children. How do you reach others who are in that same situation, who don't know what their rights are, who don't know what recourse actions to take? So that is really one of the biggest challenges I think that we all have, to be able to reach effectively into our communities to address this issue with children. So certainly Islamophobia has really challenged our ability as parents and our ability as communities to allow kids to identify themselves strongly with their faith, and to understand that their Islamic faith doesn't mean that it's contradictory to their American identity. And that's a big issue, because when people often see us, they say, okay, you're Muslim, somehow that automatically strikes out the ability to also be American. Again, we are seen as the foreigner, the outsider, the other. And we have to teach our kids, no, actually you're not. You have every right to be treated respectfully and with dignity and with the same rights and liberties that is afforded to everyone else, because you are an American, because America is exactly people from all over the world being American. But, it's a teaching process, and it's one that we have to take upon ourselves.
Also, I wanted to add to that is, absolutely, I think the situation is compounded on many levels, and it's important for all of us that are here that we're all challenging and addressing these issues and raising awareness as people who are interested in international human rights, and this issue.
So I work with a small advocacy group called U.S. Campaign for Burma, and basically we're advocating on behalf of the people of Burma with the focus on bringing in more ethnic voices into Washington, D.C. as well as at the UN, because right now you hear about a lot of changes that has happened in Burma starting from 2012 until now. But one thing I want everyone to be mindful is that what you have heard, what you have read, what you have seen from afar is a lot different than what you see on the ground. And I made 2 trips already, and every trip I came back with like literally emotionally drained because of all the stuff that I've seen and I heard. And but well, this week, this season, as it is a CSU time, so I'd rather talk about women issues instead of bringing everything. But of course, if you have questions, I'm always open to it. I'm not lazy to talk, so I'd rather answer any question you may have. So, well, in the case of Burma, historically, women have been excluded from decision-making position, and the attitude of the Burmese people, especially male, is that politics is not fitting to women's nature. Whether that is true or not, I don't accept.
I think the still, you asked
And
about
so,
taking pictures, so you might as
as
well
a
do the still
result,
pictures.
the government's
yeah.
law and policies recognizes the basic principle
Yeah, I
of
might as well
equal
do it. Yeah,
rights for the
I'm
citizens.
sure yours
But at
was
the same
fine.
time, the
I
government
just
does
wanted to
not
get
address
closer.
the need to
Yeah.
create the measures to ensure the political, social, culture, and economic changes necessary to bring about substantive equality and eliminate the discrimination against women. So if we look at the Burma history, back in 1962 to 1988, you have only 2% of women in the decision-making position. And then from 1988 to 2011, none. Even though in 1999, if some of you might have recalled, then you have democratic election. And then there was about 3% out of 845 women got, 3% of women out of the 485 seats that women got the place. Sorry, I kept mixing up my sentence. So out of 485, only 3% seats went to women, but even that they didn't get to take the position because of the dictators and the Burmese military rule. And so last year, November 2015 election, we finally got to 13% out of 674 seats. So we're still far away from the quota that we've been asking for, at least 30%. So basically, Burma is still the very bottom comparing to our other Asian neighboring countries. And also, another very sad thing is that the law in Burma also does not sufficiently promote and protect women's rights to substantive equality. And the most depressing law right now is called the laws of protection of race and religion. And this law deeply entrenches gender discrimination. And what's entailed in the law is monogamy, and then population control, and then interfaith marriage, and then religion conversion. And that does not really apply to only the Rohingya group, but also that law can affect all of us women in Burma. And so when women of Burma start going against the laws vocally, they receive death threats from the Buddhist ultra-nationalists. And also, if you go to the ethnic minorities areas, like where I came from or other ethnic groups come from, more and more of women become breadwinners these days when husbands are at the combat duty. And the problem is that the pattern of the state-sponsored sexual violence against our ethnic minority has continued despite the country is in transition to democracy. Why is because these perpetrators are protected by Article 445 from the Constitution. And therefore, the perpetrators will continue raping women using rape as weapon of war, but they don't get punished, and therefore they continue doing what they do. And another very troublesome thing for me is, so last year, well, back 2 to 3 years ago, some of you who follow Burma, you also might hear a lot about peace process, peace talk, and all those stuff. Guess what? Out of 52 negotiators from the government side, there were only 2 women. And they were sitting there at the table just as observers. And in that ethnic minority side, you saw also 2 women, which one woman thankfully get to lead the delegation. That's about it. So who is going to present women issues, women's concern, when women are not at the table? And that is why we have to continue fighting for the at least 30% quota for women to be at the high-ranking decision-making level. We, the women of Burma, we believe that the country, in order to move forward, we have to have gender equality. And therefore, our diverse organizations, meaning that all our women groups in Burma, whichever ethnic group we come from, we're trying to promote women's rights, continue doing that. And also, we're trying to break down the barrier between men and women, trying to raise the awareness, but at the same time, trying to educate men through advocacy, education, empowerment, capacity building, all this stuff, and where we bring in men to come in and learn along with us and see what we do that benefit the community as a whole, but not just our own little group. And also at the same time, the one important thing that I wanted to bring to your attention is that the women group that are more concerned about the Rohingya group, and I really strongly think that if women participation at the decision-making level could be increased, then I also think there is also more possibility to raise the Rohingya issues, as well as especially the Rohingya women who are suffering what other ethnic women are suffering. So with that, I wanted to leave it here, and then we can continue on with further discussion. And thank you so much for your attention.
Ultra Buddhist nationalists. So you have a certain group like that that pose a threat, the hate speech and all this stuff on the Muslim populations in Burma, specifically towards the Rohingya population. And so, how do we build up our allies, our work together? Majority of the time, we just have to try and look back in the laws, in the real life. So majority of the time, we're trying to base our argument on basic human rights. Because no matter what, these people, whatever religion we have, but the bottom line, we are human beings. So we all are entitled to human rights. And therefore, so that's sort of like a tactic that we have to use, because when you talk about religion issues in Burma, it's very sensitive. And that is why when they came up with the protection of the race and religion laws, and then the women's group talk about it, then they get death threat. But at the same time, if we don't talk about it, it's going to affect us. It's not just the Muslim women, but all of us. And therefore, we all collectively have to do it that way. So basically, this is really a big challenge for us in terms of talking about Muslim issues in Burma, specifically about Rohingya, because they don't even accept that there is such an ethnic group like Rohingya in Burma, and therefore they are called Bengali. But at the same time, these Bengalis cannot go back to Bangladesh because they are not Bengalis. And so the bottom line, they ended up calling, they've been called the ocean people, but then who would be able to live in the ocean aside from the sea animals? So that is why, with the struggle we have, we're trying to maneuver through, and hopefully we can overcome.
Guantanamo Bay, and all the other black sites, and how Muslim bodies were targeted and violated, tortured by the state, where as a result of that, we had this international outcry against those offshore prisons and what was happening there. What that says, it's the scapegoating, the way scapegoating works as a form of terror to basically control population, manage population, so the state can further its own political agenda. We have seen an outcry against how Muslims are treated in Guantanamo Bay and other places, but we have not seen that in domestic realm, in the federal court system, where human rights of Muslims, U.S. citizens, have been violated through secret evidences where they did not have access to by violating due process, and also prison conditions. There are, I don't know if anybody knows, there are 2 secret prisons in like Guantanamo Bay, or according to prisoners and their families and advocates who have been working around these trying to provide support or campaigns, which is a really small population within the social justice movement in the U.S., where there we identify these 2 prisons in Indiana and Illinois as Guantanamo Bay North. And they have gone through lawsuits, and there's still a lawsuit going on to try to find out how these Muslims are being placed in these locations without any due process, and what is the process of why they're in these prisons, which was created secretly in 2004 and 6. So it's to Muslim as a stateless Muslim Americans, or Muslim in general globally. There's a global, Islamophobia is a part of the global racial apartheid system, which is connected to whiteness and how whiteness was structured within, in colonial discourses and whatnot. The way the Muslim population is being treated is how stateless, where you have basically, when we see prisoners in Guantanamo, basically they have nothing. Well, we understand that there is no law. They're outside of the law, right? So as a result, they have nothing but their humanity. That's how Muslims are being treated, which is very similar to how stateless people are in conditions in between modern states, whereas Muslims are in between politics and the law. Xenophobia, Islamophobia is integral to the maintenance of the modern nation state. Women are Muslim women, where our first speaker is talking about, we have to be the ambassadors of Islam, of our community, and have to organize and work, speak out and whatnot. At the same time, we are targeted as well as terrorists, are viewed as that, and we're also a threat to our own self because of our bodily markers and identification. So basically, the humanity of women is in question. At the same time, it is the humanity of women that is also a danger to our own self under Islamophobic constructions, and the way it is operating, though it's targeting Muslim population. So what I see, some of the common themes is the modern nation state in the country of Burma, India, and then U.S., and how women are embedded socially constructed, institutional hierarchical structures, race, religion, politics, communal interactions, ethnic interactions within nation states, and how kind of the bottom of the bottom, and how we're the other of the others, basically. And these interactions, we're all trying to obtain our rights In the U.S., we're trying to get our civil rights because those rights are being violated through the federal system. In Burma, women trying to obtain rights that are in the laws, but they are not given those rights. And then we have an Indian context, where a similar context where bodies are being used to basically violate continuously. So this form of violence. So this modern state, it's violence on Muslim women, Muslim in general, and then Muslim women in particular, and then the way it practices power over our bodies, and then the question of women's humanity. I see these interconnections and overlap where we're now trying to obtain our rights, right? We're fighting. This is like an uphill battle that we don't know where it's going to take, whether or not we're going to actually achieve that rights, those equality, those human rights. What I see, the interconnections is that as a woman, Muslim women, and then across Dalit women and other Indian women and other ethnic communities in Burma, that the suffering that's happening as a result of the violations of our rights, as a result of the targeting, as a result of the scapegoating, and how the state that is supposed to give us, take away the construction of the modern state as a result of decolonization that happened, or the post-colonial state that modern states have emerged from, where we have, as a collective communities of color, as a collective minorities, try to decolonize ourselves by basically resisting the violence that we're experiencing as a colonized people. We were wanting human rights. We were wanting, this is the liberal modern democracy and its project. I wanted to pose that question and see whether or not the modern liberal project, which holds up freedom of rights, human rights, equal opportunity, equality, that we are all striving for, wanting and fighting for our equality, for our existence as a living human being, and how that is, whether or not this liberal project is a project that will actually give us our rights, or it's a form of neo-colonial practices where if we switch the perspective from the bottom of the bottom, we're trying to access our rights, right? The states that has taken our rights, so we're trying to resist and work or organize around it to access that rights. But if we look at from so we are dehumanized, so the state can perpetuate itself and extend its power all over. But if we look at from the perspective of the state, and that's a question I want to pose here, to see how the work that we are doing, whether or not our work toward wanting to have human rights, equality, the modern liberal ethics or morality that is based on modern liberal morality is how, whether or not that is a colonial construct. Because if we look at from the perspective of the state, or from colonization, from European imperialism, one of the things when they went to in South Asia, Africa, and other places, the discourse was the local natives were the savages. They were violent, right? So they were trying to actually humanize the local community by converting to Christianity. So the narrative, so the liberal modern morality and values that we have right now, whether or not that's a colonial construct, or is it something that we should be striving for. The other thing around organizing or solidarity that I want to raise, the women that are targeted, or the families who are targeted and incarcerated, you have people are organizing. It's a very small community. There's a difference between grassroots organizing and then advocacy work, where grassroots basically, it should seek to change the root causes of social injustice, as opposed to fixing the symptoms or reforming laws and whatnot, but trying to actually change the whole system. In this context, there's also other issues that we as a woman, specifically, for example, Muslim women in the U.S. who are being targeted by our own country, by our government, the state. Then there are other communities around the world, stateless people, or other communities where their rights, where their state is violating their rights. Those communities are wanting support from the U.S. Or women in those countries. So how do we build? What would be the strategies that we could use where, you know, other communities that we want to build with, stand in solidarity with, is not asking for assistance from our oppressor? So how do we build solidarity with communities who are stateless, who needs somebody like U.S. to police their own state, so they get their own rights in their own country. So these are kind of the issues when we're trying to also build solidarity with communities who are, you know, very, very marginalized around the country as a woman. Anyhow, so I'll stop there. I was wondering, in the work that you all are doing, how do you build that community, the organizing work that you do across class, race, and what kind of obstacles do you face or have you faced? So it goes back to this power of the state and how it's exercised. It's the human rights that all of us are using to build coalition with other communities as a common ground. Yet human rights is actually at the discretion of the state. So it's there in the opposite direction. I will open it up to other people, the audience, for questions, comments. Yes.